The frigid Wyoming winter wind howled like a wounded beast as Beatrice Morgan huddled closer to the dying embers of her campfire, her slender fingers trembling from cold and hunger. 3 days since the stagecoach accident had left her stranded in the wilderness. 3 days of rationing the meager provisions she'd salvaged from the wreckage. Now, as the last light faded from the western sky, she had nothing left but desperate prayers and the fading hope of rescue. The snapping of a twig sent her heart racing. Beatrice clutched the small knife hidden in the folds of her travel-worn skirt, the only protection she had against the dangers that lurked in the gathering darkness of 1876 Wyoming territory. "Hello there," a deep voice called out, calm and steady. "Don't be alarmed, madam." A tall figure emerged from the tree line, leading a chestnut mare. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but Beatrice could make out a strong jaw dusted with several days' worth of stubble. "Are you hurt?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. "No, sir," Beatrice replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Just lost, and hungry." The stranger nodded, his eyes taking in her makeshift camp, the torn traveling dress, and the desperate situation written across her face. "Ethan Xavier," he introduced himself, touching the brim of his hat, "was tracking a mountain lion when I spotted your fire." He approached slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal, and knelt by the dying embers. "Mind if I build this up a bit?" "Night's fixing to be colder than a banker's heart." Beatrice nodded, relief washing over her as Ethan set to work. His movements were efficient, practiced. Within minutes, the fire blazed anew, throwing warm light across the small clearing. "When did you last eat?" he asked, reaching into his saddlebag. "Yesterday morning," Beatrice admitted. "I had some dried beef, but it's gone now." Ethan pulled out a cloth-wrapped package and a canteen. He handed her the canteen first, then unwrapped the cloth to reveal a substantial portion of sourdough bread and a chunk of salted pork. "It ain't fancy," he said with a hint of apology in his voice, "but it'll fill your belly." Beatrice's hands shook as she accepted his offering. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier. I'm Beatrice Morgan. Pleased to meet you, Miss Morgan, though I wish the circumstances were better." His eyes, the color of weathered denim, met hers across the fire. "Mind telling me how you came to be out here all alone?" Between mouthfuls of the most delicious bread she'd ever tasted, Beatrice related the tale of the stagecoach accident. How the driver had lost control on the narrow mountain road. How she alone had survived, while the driver and her fellow passengers had perished. How she'd been making her way toward what she hoped was civilization. "I was heading to Whispering Pines," she explained. "My aunt lives there, she's expecting me." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Whispering Pines is about 3 days' ride from here, too far to walk, especially with winter setting in." He glanced at the darkening sky. "We'll make camp here tonight. Come morning, I'll take you there." "I couldn't possibly impose, Miss Morgan," Ethan interrupted gently. "There's a storm brewing, and these mountains are no place for anyone to be alone right now. I was heading back that way anyhow." As the night deepened around them, Beatrice found herself studying the cowboy across the fire. His hands were rough and calloused, but they moved with unexpected grace as he prepared a simple bedroll for her. His face was weathered from years under the sun, yet his eyes held a kindness that put her at ease despite their strange circumstances. "Get some rest," Ethan said, settling himself on the opposite side of the fire. "We've got a long ride ahead tomorrow." Morning came with pearl-gray light filtering through the pine branches. Beatrice woke to find Ethan already up, brewing coffee in a blackened pot suspended over a fresh fire. "You're an early riser," she observed, accepting the tin cup he offered. "Sun and cattle wait for no man," he replied with a small smile. "Hope you don't mind riding double. Star here is strong, but I don't have a spare mount." The day passed in steady progress through the rugged terrain. Ethan seated behind her on the saddle, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he guided Star around obstacles. He shared stories of the territory, pointing out landmarks and talking of the changes he'd seen since arriving 8 years prior. "Where were you before Wyoming?" Beatrice asked as they paused to rest the horse beside a clear, rushing stream. "All over," Ethan replied, his gaze distant. "Texas, mostly. Drove cattle up the Kishome Trail a few times. Tried my hand at prospecting in Colorado. Nothing stuck until I came here." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "What brings you to Wyoming territory?" Beatrice sighed, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "My parents passed last spring. Influenza. I've been teaching school in Ohio, but there's nothing left for me there now. Aunt Harriet is my only family." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Fresh starts can be a blessing. This country has a way of letting a person reinvent themselves." They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow. As they shared another meal of Ethan's provisions, Beatrice found herself increasingly drawn to this quiet, capable man. There was a steadiness to him that she found comforting, a dependability that stood in stark contrast to the chaos of recent months. "How did you learn to survive out here?" she asked as they sat beside the fire, the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. "Necessity," Ethan answered, his fingers working a small piece of wood with his knife. "And good teachers. Spent some time with a Shoshone hunting party when I first arrived. They taught me more in 2 weeks than I'd learned in 20 years back east." "You're from the east." A shadow crossed his features. "Massachusetts. My father owned textile mills, had my life all mapped out Harvard, then joining the family business." He paused, the knife stilling in his hand. "War changed everything, came back different, couldn't stand the walls closing in anymore." "You fought in the war," Ethan nodded, his expression guarded. "Union Army, Antietam, Gettysburg. Places I try not to revisit in my mind." Beatrice reached across the space between them, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "I'm sorry." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits adrift in the vastness of the frontier. The next day's journey took them through increasingly rugged terrain. Ethan pointed out signs of wildlife elk tracks, a bear's claw marks on a tree teaching Beatrice to read the wilderness around them. "Look there," he said, guiding her gaze to a distant ridge where a majestic elk stood silhouetted against the sky. "King of the mountain." As they watched, the elk raised its massive antlered head, scenting the wind before disappearing into the forest. "It's beautiful," Beatrice breathed. "All of it. I never imagined such wildness could exist." "It gets in your blood," Ethan replied softly. "Makes it hard to imagine living any other way." By midday, dark clouds gathered on the horizon and the wind took on a biting edge. Ethan frowned at the sky, then urged Star into a faster pace. "There's a line shack about an hour ahead," he explained. "Used it during spring roundup. We need to reach it before that storm hits." They pushed on through increasingly difficult conditions, the wind whipping at their clothing as the temperature dropped. When the small cabin finally came into view, nestled against a rocky outcropping, Beatrice could have wept with relief. The interior was Spartan but solid, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Ethan busied himself starting a fire while Beatrice explored the tiny space. "It's not much," he said apologetically, "but it'll keep us dry." Outside, the storm arrived with sudden fury, rain lashing against the single window, wind howling through the eaves. Beatrice helped Ethan prepare a simple meal from the cabin store's beans, jerky softened in the cooking liquid and the last of his bread. "Where did you learn to bake?" she asked, savoring the sourdough. A rare smile crossed Ethan's face. "My mother. She believed every man should know how to feed himself properly, said it was the difference between surviving and living." "She sounds wise." She was. His voice held a gentle reverence. "Past 10 years ago, but I still hear her voice sometimes, especially when I'm kneading dough." As the evening deepened, the storm showed no signs of abating. They sat before the fire, the small cabin growing warm and comfortable despite the raging elements outside. "Tell me about your ranch," Beatrice said, genuinely curious about the life he'd built. Ethan's expression softened. "It's small compared to some, but it's mine. 300 acres along the Sweetwater. Started with just 20 head of cattle and a dream." He paused, staring into the flames. "Got close to 100 head now. Good stock, building a proper house come spring." "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "It's lonely sometimes," he admitted, his voice low. "Beautiful country, but the winters are long." Their eyes met across the small space, and Beatrice felt her heart quicken. There was something in his gaze, a question, perhaps, or a hope that resonated within her own heart. The storm lasted through the night and into the following day, trapping them in the cabin together. They passed the time with conversation and simple tasks. Ethan repaired a loose floorboard while Beatrice organized the provisions on the shelves. They discovered shared interests in literature and music, debated politics with surprising compatibility, and slowly revealed their histories to one another. Beatrice spoke of her years teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, of her dreams to someday open a proper school of her own. Ethan listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions, revealing in his responses an education and intellect that belied his rugged exterior. "You miss teaching," he observed as they shared coffee by the fire, rain still drumming steadily on the roof. "I do," she admitted. "There's something wonderful about watching a child discover the world through books and numbers." "Whispering Pines has no proper school," Ethan said. "Folks have been talking about the need for one." A spark of excitement flared in Beatrice's chest. "Truly," Ethan nodded. "Town's growing. Lots of families settling now that the railroad's coming through. Children need education." His eyes met hers. "They'd be lucky to have someone like you." The storm finally broke on the morning of the third day, leaving behind a world transformed by fresh snow and crystalline sunlight. They set out again, the landscape glistening around them, stars' hooves crunching through the new fallen powder. By midday they crested a ridge and Ethan reined in, pointing to a distant collection of buildings nestled in a valley below. "Whispering Pines," he said. "We'll be there by nightfall." Beatrice felt a curious mixture of emotions, relief at reaching her destination, but also a strange reluctance. These days with Ethan had awakened something in her, a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. As they made their final approach to the town, Ethan cleared his throat. "Miss Morgan, Beatrice, I was wondering if I might call on you once you're settled with your aunt." Her heart fluttered. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Xavier." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Just Ethan." They rode down the main street as twilight was settling over Whispering Pines. Lanterns were being lit in windows, casting warm yellow squares onto the snow. Ethan guided Star to a neat white house at the edge of town, where smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. "This is Harriet Wilkins' place," he explained. "Your aunt." Before Beatrice could respond, the front door flew open and an older woman rushed out, her face a picture of mingled joy and concern. "Beatrice? Oh, thank heavens!" Harriet enveloped her in a fierce embrace. "We heard about the stagecoach days ago. I feared the worst." Over her aunt's shoulder, Beatrice met Ethan's eyes. He tipped his hat with a smile that made her heart skip, then turned to leave. "Ethan, wait," she called. "Aunt Harriet, this is Mr. Ethan Xavier. He saved my life." What followed was a whirlwind of introductions, explanations, and Harriet's insistence that Ethan stay for dinner, at the very least. He accepted with gracious humility, though Beatrice noticed how he subtly straightened his weather-worn coat and smoothed his hair before entering her aunt's home. Dinner was a merry affair, with Harriet pressing second and third helpings onto Ethan's plate while peppering him with questions about his ranch and his rescue of Beatrice. For his part, Ethan downplayed his role, emphasizing instead Beatrice's courage and resilience in surviving the stagecoach accident. "She's a remarkable woman," he said, his eyes meeting Beatrice's across the table. "Kept her head in circumstances that would have broken many." As the evening drew to a close, Ethan rose to take his leave. Harriet, with a knowing glance between the two of them, made herself scarce, mentioning dishes that needed washing in the kitchen. "I meant what I said earlier." Ethan spoke quietly, standing with Beatrice by the front door. "I'd very much like to call on you if you're amenable." "I am," Beatrice replied, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Very much so." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Sunday then, after church services," she nodded, returning his smile. "I'll look forward to it." True to his word, Ethan appeared at Harriet's door the following Sunday, freshly shaved, wearing a clean shirt and his best coat. Beatrice felt a flutter of nerves as she greeted him, suddenly conscious of how her borrowed dress might appear to his eyes. Her worries vanished when she saw his expression admiration, clear and unguarded. "You look beautiful," he said simply. They walked through town, Ethan pointing out landmarks and introducing her to townsfolk they encountered. Everyone seemed to know and respect him, from the blacksmith who waved heartily from his forge to the elderly shopkeeper who insisted on gifting Beatrice with a ribbon for her hair to welcome the new schoolteacher. "Word travels fast," Beatrice observed with surprise. "Small towns," Ethan chuckled. "No secrets here. I may have mentioned to Mayor Collins that you're an experienced teacher." "Ethan, I haven't even decided if I'm staying permanently." He looked momentarily abashed. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have presumed." "It's just the town needs someone like you, and you seemed interested when we discussed it." She softened, touched by his enthusiasm. "I am interested, truly. I just need time to consider all aspects of such a decision." "Of course," he agreed. "No rush." Their courtship unfolded gradually over the coming weeks. Sunday walks became a tradition, sometimes joined by Aunt Harriet, more often just the two of them exploring the countryside around Whispering Pines. Ethan brought her to his ranch, showing her with undisguised pride the land he'd worked so hard to tame. The modest cabin he currently called home was clean and functional, but Beatrice's attention was caught by the partially constructed foundation nearby. "My new house," Ethan explained, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "It'll have 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, even a study." He hesitated. "Too grand for just one person, some might say." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Winter yielded slowly to spring. Beatrice accepted the position of schoolteacher for Whispering Pines, holding classes temporarily in the back room of the church, while the town constructed a proper schoolhouse. She threw herself into the work with passion, delighting in the eager minds of her students. On a warm evening in late April, Ethan invited her to dinner at his ranch. He seemed unusually nervous as he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I hope you don't mind eating outdoors," he said, guiding her toward a spot he'd prepared near a flowering apple tree. A blanket was spread on the ground and a picnic hamper waited alongside a bottle of wine. "It's perfect," Beatrice assured him, charmed by the effort he'd clearly expended. As they dined on roast chicken, fresh bread his own, and early spring vegetables, the conversation flowed easily between them, comfortable now after months of acquaintance. When the meal concluded, Ethan grew quiet, his fingers tapping nervously against his knee. "Ethan, is something wrong?" He took a deep breath, then reached for her hand. "Beatrice, when I found you by that campfire last winter, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. Before you, I was just existing out here, building something with no real purpose beyond the work itself." He squeezed her fingers gently. "You've brought light and purpose to my days. The thought of going back to a life without you in it is," he swallowed hard, "unbearable." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's," he said, tipping a delicate gold ring with a small diamond into his palm. "I've been carrying it since I was 16 years old, waiting for the right woman to wear it." Beatrice's heart hammered in her chest as Ethan slid from the blanket to one knee before her. "Beatrice Morgan, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, too overcome for speech at first. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Ethan, I will." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. They were married on a perfect June morning, with wildflowers decorating the little church and the entire town in attendance. Harriet wept happy tears as she gave her niece away, and Mayor Collins beamed as he pronounced them husband and wife. The new schoolhouse opened that autumn, with Beatrice Xavier proudly serving as its first teacher. Their home on the ranch, completed with the help of neighbors and friends over the summer, became known for its hospitality. The lamp in the window always lit for travelers and friends alike. Years passed, and the Xavier Ranch prospered. Their family grew with the birth of 2 sons and a daughter, each child bringing new joy to the home built with such love. Ethan never tired of telling their children the story of how he'd found their mother cold, hungry, but brave beyond measure beside a dying fire in the wilderness. "Your father saved my life with bread and kindness," Beatrice would add, her hand finding Ethan's across the dinner table. "And your mother saved mine with her heart," Ethan would reply, his eyes still holding the same wonder when they looked at her as they had on that first night by the campfire. On winter evenings, when Wyoming winds howled around the eaves of their sturdy home, they would sit before the fire, sometimes in companionable silence, sometimes sharing dreams and memories. In those moments, Beatrice would often reflect on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together: a tragic accident, a hungry night, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who became the love of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan would ask, noticing her distant smile. "How fortunate I am," she would answer truthfully, "that you happened to be tracking a mountain lion that day." Ethan would chuckle, pulling her close. "Wasn't tracking anything," he'd confess. "I saw smoke from your fire and worried someone might be in trouble." Best decision I ever made, investigating that smoke. As their children grew and the ranch expanded, Beatrice and Ethan remained the heart of Whispering Pines. Their home became a gathering place for community celebrations, and their partnership served as an example of what love could build in this harsh but beautiful territory. 20 years after that fateful meeting by the fire, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their eldest son ride in with his new bride. Their daughter was teaching in the schoolhouse Beatrice had established, and their younger son was studying medicine back east. "Did you ever imagine this life?" Ethan asked, his arm around her waist, silver now threading through his once dark hair. Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder, thinking of the frightened, hungry woman she'd been and the unexpected journey that had led her here. "No," she answered honestly, "this is far better than anything I could have imagined." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for saying yes when a dusty cowboy offered you bread by a dying fire." "Thank you for being that cowboy," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "For sharing your bread and your life." Their kiss, witnessed only by the setting sun and the distant mountains, held all the tenderness of first love and all the depth of a union tested and strengthened by years of shared joys and sorrows. In that moment, as in countless others before it, they were reminded that sometimes the greatest journeys begin when we're lost, and the most precious treasures are found when we least expect them. And as night fell over their beloved Wyoming home, the light from their window shone bright, a beacon of welcome and warmth in the vastness of the frontier, just as Ethan's campfire had once been for a hungry traveler who would change his life forever.